Good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest open house session with Indica Books and Otis. We have a few people joining for the first time, or at least relatively new. So I will do a quick introduction here. So the purpose of this group is to help people who are authors or writers, or in general, anyone who is interested in improving their craft of writing, to submit pieces to Otis. 800 to 1,000 words in length is what we recommend, and send them in a PDF format, a double space, so it makes it easier to read and to provide feedback. And Otis goes over, reviews all the pieces that he's received, and he sends you feedback by email. And then when we meet on Sundays, typically at 8 p.m., the time changes a little bit when daylight savings ends in the US, but when we meet, Otis goes over the pieces, and he uses each such piece to talk about the general principles of writing, good writing, the art and craft of writing, the technicalities of writing. This is an interactive session, so again, as I've said before, feel free to ask questions, to interject, to disagree with Otis, to debate points with him. Yes, absolutely. Disagree with him and prove him wrong. If and I don't mean use the social media trollish approach to arguing, but if you genuinely think that because there's a lot of good advice that is doled out, there's a lot of you get to see other people's writings, and some of them are absolutely enthralling, enchanting pieces of writing. You get to learn about things such as point of view and your principles of writing, such as showing and not telling, show don't tell, the pitfalls of head hopping, and so on. And those are all things that, again, I think I've said in one session before, is that we subconsciously appreciate good writing when we read it. Often enough, we don't quite understand, and we don't perhaps even need to understand what makes a good piece of writing good. But when we do sit down and start writing, all of those things come back to haunt us if you have not paid enough attention, or we have to take a crash course in learning. So this is your chance to get feedback on writing. And with that long monologue, I'll turn this over to you, Otis.
Okay, thank you. I like that phrase, head hopping. That does capture something that I've been talking about for so long, which is basically having multiple points of view. So I like that term. And I think the other thing that's really important, I don't know about, like arguing with me, maybe that's the right choice. But I would like to suggest I'm not really trying to be an adversary, or if I am trying to be an adversary, I am, or an antagonist, if we want to use the story language. I'm not really trying to be an antagonist. I'm trying to, maybe I try to face people with what I think is reality, and most of my advice really comes from experience and from thinking very deeply about essentially how the human brain, how human beings respond to stories. It's something that's been going on for thousands of years. The human brain, human beings and stories have evolved together, over a long course of time, along with language. Stories are one of the main reasons that we have language. So, and the other thing is, whatever I suggest, and if anyone suggests anything, I don't think we're ever, when you're working on a piece, we're not working on a piece as a committee. This is not a committee writing project by any means. Basically, anything that I offer, you do have to grapple with, and you have to go your own way. Finally, you have to write what you want to write. I've believed that all my life, and so whatever it is that you want to write, and whatever it is that you're driven to write, basically your obligation is to find a way to do that so that you get an audience. That's really the big problem, is that we can of course write whatever we want, but how do we write what we want and get an audience? Those are two things. So anyway, let's start. Madhavi,
Hi, Otis.
come join us.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good. I hear we have not done this piece. I mean, I think it's been sitting in my in the airplane hangar here for weeks.
I was not able to join last week. We had a send off
Yeah.
for one of our friends who's leaving town.
Oh, okay.
So I had to be there. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see, Abhinav. I need you to allow me to have screen sharing if you have not now disappeared, which is blank screen.
Yes, just did that. So you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so Madhavi, tell us a little bit about this piece.
Actually, I was writing something serious about Mahabharata and I was stuck. I told you last time also that I was not able to progress. So I kept it aside and took some inspiration from my younger one. And this is what turned out to be. So basically,
Okay, so
it's actually something that I experienced during his exams. He was into the nursery class, 3-year-old kid, and he had to sit through 7 days of rigorous examination. So I went through the process with him.
It's crazy, right?
It was really hilarious, crazy, and
Yeah.
I teared up from time to time. So I thought, why not put it on paper?
Right. It's kind of a story of like society out
Slice
of
of
control.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but it's like it is that thing where like you're at home in your domestic sphere, right, with your children, and you understand, you know, quite a lot about life from that vantage point. And then you have this society that is out of control. You know, they're like, well, you have to have exams and you have to get ready and you have to make this progress because you have to join the economy. You know, it's like, what? This is my child, you know? Tell me a little bit. So you felt stuck with the piece on the Mahabharata, and so you turned to this. So tell me a little bit about that, actually. You know, what was your feeling of being stuck, and then what happened when you moved over to this sphere, because it's a much different kind of project.
Yeah, I'm trying to write about Prince Arjuna when he was when he was living a life incognito, and there was a war going on and he couldn't join the war. So what was going on with him and all that? But I was not able to put his like whatever I had envisaged, I couldn't put it in on paper. So I thought, let's rest for some time, deviate my mind somewhere else, and then come back to the piece. I still haven't touched it, but I plan to do that in the coming few weeks. So, but it was difficult to get anything on paper at that time because I was so invested into that piece and I couldn't write anything. Whatever I used to write, I used to just delete it by the end of the day. So I thought I'll just put it in cold storage for some time, clear my head, write a few pieces, something other than that, and then come back to it.
Okay.
So this is
Well,
well,
I mean, you know, what occurs to me a little bit is that, you know, with that piece, you basically have to imagine the situation of that character, which is, you know, from your great distance, right, is difficult to do. But that finally is something that you do have to do as the writer. You do have to be able to imagine that experience. And it's sort of like a way of like, you need to take ownership of it. You need to have a kind of confidence with it. And I'm sort of wondering, I guess, a little bit of like, so, you know, finding some difficulty with that and lacking confidence in that, you then go to this presently centered domestic piece where you feel like you do have a lot of authority. So like I use that word authority on purpose. Authority is author, right? So authority with this piece, it's like you didn't feel that you had the authority in a sense to write it maybe, or you weren't developing it. And in this piece you did. And so I would imagine it was kind of a relief to be able to write this, in a sense, a smaller, personal piece that you understood very well.
So I was kind of irritated that I'm not able to write anything at all. So I wanted to do something.
Okay, so I do have a couple comments about this, which I would call writer's block a little bit. I don't really like the term writer's block because it's kind of a negative term that sounds like a block, and I don't deal with blocks. So one, try not to delete anything. That's one of my advices. So advices, is that even a word? So that's my advice. Don't delete anything, because what we're actually trying to do is we're just trying to get words on a page. And then our objective is to get words on a page, and then we will revise them. They're two different things. There's one, getting words on the page. This is very hard work. Someone said, it's in dispute who said this. They said, writing is easy, you just open a vein. That's worth everybody writing down. Writing is easy, you just open a vein. It's, it's a kind of bloodletting. We have to let it flow. That's it. That is not easy to do, of course. Writing's easy. It's not easy to open a vein, but that's finally what we have to do. And then we just do it. That puts words on the page. Then we come out and we're another person. We are absolutely another person, another kind of writer. There's two kinds of writers: the person who writes the first thing, and then the person who looks at that and then evaluates it and rewrites it. Two different writers. Ideally, there's also another person who then sends this work out and publishes it and does all that work. Okay, so I haven't quite gotten, like that person is not a person I like to be very much. It's sort of a business person. Okay, so anyway, but these two are really important. So I kind of want to, in terms of writing it and dealing with writer's block, you have to deal with this person, the person who writes it. You don't want to be the person who writes it, which you're doing, and then come in as this person and says, this should not even be, because now these two people are at war with each other. This person's writing, they're doing their job, and then this person is coming in and deleting it. That is not the kind of feeling of success that this writer needs in order to do their job. They need to feel successful. They need to feel as if what they've written is good enough for this person. This person will accept it, and then they'll rewrite it. They can do that. They can rewrite it, but they should not delete it. That's a long, long explanation. And then the other thing that I think is crucial is to my other mantra is writers write. So I believe that whether we're published or not published, whatever we're doing, we are a writer. That is our identity if we are writing. And so in order to preserve that identity for myself, I write, and I write every day. So, and you're doing that. Yeah, I mean, you felt stuck with this one, and so you moved on to another project. And so that definitely works. But you want to determine what projects you do want to work on, and then really persist. So I would say, if this is the project that you mainly want to do, keep coming back to it, keep writing it, don't get rid of anything, but set out different times. Like you might have an hour of writing, and then you might have an hour of rewriting. Different people, different kinds of mindsets. But anyway, writer's block, as it's called, is definitely something that I had to deal with at a certain point in my career, and I frankly dealt with it, and I don't have it anymore. And I can produce a lot of material. Can I control all the material that I produce? Can I do something with it? That's maybe a little bit different question. But okay, let's take a look at a little of this. I would like to so see, I got here. I'm going to have you, do you see that yellow line? Sorry, that's not a very good color. There's a yellow line. You kind of come to a point in this piece. So if you could read from this top part, for a better part of a year, my son refused, and then read down to that bottom part.
For a better part of the year, my son refused to believe that his teacher was a real person. Whenever she started lecturing the students about alphabets or numbers, he would say, "Why is she talking? Ask her to sing." Or, "Why is the movie not playing?" The most profound statement he made about his teacher during the second term was, "She's the best cartoon character ever." He met the teacher for the first time after about 6 months of online interactions. Since that day, Baby V has made considerable progress, according to the teacher. He started paying more attention during the class and even answered the questions she asked. During the last few days, we got to experience the teacher's examiner avatar. She asked questions to the children as if they were appearing for a graduate viva. She even made the parents feel like they were sitting through the most important exam of their life. I felt preparing for my postgraduate viva was easier than making Baby V talk to the teacher. At times, he simply refused to acknowledge her presence. During the maths viva, he wanted to count the cars passing by outside our window and not the stars and balloons that she was asking him to count on screen. She asked him about the things one can see in the sky, and he replied, "The cement mixer is very big." And to think I had revised the topic with him just a few minutes ago. These instances made me wonder whether these children need such kind of assessments at such a tender age. They don't understand what is a school like, and the online classes are nothing more than a few hours of interaction-based entertainment for them.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I enjoyed this piece. My comments on it are, so I go right to this area here. Is this the major question of this piece? So one of the things that we decide about in our writing is, what kind of thing are we writing? Are we writing a story, a narrative-based story, or are we writing a piece of nonfiction that has some kind of purpose? So a narrative-driven story would include memoir, for example, generally. So memoir is a narrative-driven story, even though it's, in theory, nonfiction. Stories with characters, Don Quixote, War and Peace, et cetera, these are all narrative-driven stories. And basically they emphasize a character and a character's journey through time, essentially, where they have various kinds of adventures and they come ideally to some point of change for themselves. They're confronted with themselves and then they change. But it's the character is the center. The narrator in a story, a narrative story, basically supports this character. So they do things that help us understand the character, define things, say he said, she said, give us relevant information, but they don't do anything sweeping or from above usually. They basically concentrate their attention on helping the reader understand this narrative journey. Then on the other side, we have nonfiction. Nonfiction is, well, let me say this, the story basis essentially has a universal appeal. So anyone in the world can involve themselves with the story, because what happens with a story is that the reader basically has a sympathetic resonance for the character, and then they get to participate in the actions of the story along with the character, and then they gain by experience, through the reading experience, they gain what the character gains through supposedly living the experience. So a story is universal. Essentially, if we do it well, anyone in the world, if they pick it up and it's written in their language, will read it, form an association with it, and respond to it. Nonfiction, on the other hand, generally has a more specific audience. So it's not usually universal. it's basically designed for people who have a similar interest in this topic, right? So that's where I get this first question. So is this the major question of this piece? What might this thesis be? So the thesis is you have an idea that you're proposing. You're trying to say something, and you're basically trying to say something to somebody. You're trying to reach someone. So you have a purpose. The story's purpose is a universal purpose. Everyone wants to live a more fulfilled life. Everyone wants the things that they want. Will they get them or not? What will they get? It offers us this catharsis about, our future possibilities. So everyone wants that. But nonfiction is more specific to someone's particular interest. So in this piece, when I'm reading it, the writing is great. There's an idea behind it, but it's sort of a little bit of a mix between telling a story, which you've been doing, and writing a thesis, writing a nonfiction piece that's meant to express a point of view that you have and to reach an audience of some kind. You're basically, it seems to me, writing a thesis piece where you're saying, what you're doing is nuts. That's like kind of what you're saying. So if that's what you want to do with this piece, and I think that this is a nice piece that I think you should work on and maybe send out to an online magazine, but it would be an online magazine that's like parenting magazine. There's a number of different places where it might go. You'd want to take this thesis statement and move it up top so that we understand it right away, because we're not reading it as a story. We're not getting involved with the character and the character journey. We're instead reading this thing that's a little bit of a slice of life. And in the nonfiction piece, basically the characters here, the baby V, and any of the characters in the piece, they're really working in service of the narrator and the narrator's argument. So the relationship is different. In nonfiction, the characters, human beings, they work in service of the narrator's argument. In fiction, the narrator works in service of the character journey. That's, I think, I would like to delineate that essential difference between the two. I'll just say it again for everybody. So in fiction or in story-driven memoir or whatever it is, the narrator serves the character. In nonfiction, the characters serve the narrator. So basically what you do is you're making an argument and you use this personal experience as an example in order to make your point. And
So basically to change the treatment that I've given, because when I was trying to elaborate on this point, this also occurred to me before, that there's just one passing statement, so it needs to be elaborated. But when I tried doing it, the flavor changed. I mean, it was becoming more serious of a write-up, and I didn't want it at that time. So probably if I change the treatment, I start with this statement, it will become a different write-up altogether.
yeah, it will. And it'll be much more directed. It will not be as fun because this is a first draft, right? This is that person who writes the draft comes in. They're not this analytical person. They simply want to write. So they write the story. They enjoy going into the point of view, and they enjoy writing the details, and they enjoy writing the sentences, and they like doing that. Then this person comes in who's not as nice and not as fun at all. And they're like, okay, so now what are we doing with it? How is it going to be the most effective? How is it going to reach an audience, right? That's the question. So like what happens when I read this piece, I'm thinking, as I'm reading through, I'm like, why do I care, basically? Which in a way I don't, I have these issues with my kids a little bit, but I'm not really being drawn in to care in this piece as I'm reading it. So you're not finding me as an audience. If I pick this up, on the bus, this is a good, I'm taking the bus and I just see this and I open it and I pick it up, I'm probably not going to keep reading it. So what you need to do is you need to come in and revise it, and you need to grab the reader and tell them why it's important. And then let them decide whether it's important to them, because it's a narrower frame. It's not universal. This is not a universal story. It's a narrower frame, but it could appeal to me, for example, because I do have kids, So then the question is, how do we do that? This writer she's done her job. She's gotten it on the page. Now this writer has to come in, the person who revises, and figure out how to design this for an audience if that's what you want to do. It is a lot more work. It's easy to write, kind of, but it's hard to find an audience for our writing. And to find that audience, we have to do all this other work to take our ideas and formulate them in a way that grabs the reader and tells them why it's important, and then illustrates the idea in the text, and then leaves them with a feeling of this is important, basically. And yeah, so if you take that thesis out, basically, if it's a thesis-driven argument, we take the thesis out and we want to put it up top. But before we get to the thesis, we're going to write a paragraph, and the thesis is going to be down at the bottom of it. The paragraph is actually going to be a context. We're going to contextualize our argument. And in the context, we basically try to grab the reader. The context is the thing that says, read this. If you care about this, you're also going to care about what I say about it. And so the context here might be in present day education, or it could be even more specific, education in India. If your audience is every parent, your audience might be parents in India, right? It might be parents in just your school. It depends, but you want to focus your argument and tell people that this essay is for them. So you contextualize it and you say, in Indian education today, there is a tremendous emphasis on testing. I ask you, is it insane? I'm just being funny, and doing it, but that's kind of what you're doing. The context is there's an emphasis on testing, and your thesis is it nuts? And then once you've done that in your first paragraph, then you can enter into your story, which is very personal and very captivating. But that first little part of it tells the reader whether they want to go on with you and they understand the purpose of what you're doing. And so that little first paragraph delineates it into nonfiction, and you already write in a very enjoyable style. So then you're going to craft it into this enjoyable and personal style. And there you go. It's doing great. As opposed to something that begins just with a story and makes me feel like I'm getting something of universal significance, which I'm really not. So that ends up being, the phrase bait and switch. Bait and switch means you put something out, and then once the reader grabs it, you switch it for something else. So this has a feeling of being a universal story, but then I find out that it's not a universal story. It's actually a specific nonfiction piece. So you want to be upfront with that. But I think it's a nice piece, and I think it's worth working on. And I think if you do work on it and organize it, I would send it to a couple places. It might get turned down, but you'll have the experience of doing it.
Sure, I'll definitely work on it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Otis.
Yeah, of course. And let's see, we want the request. Okay, is Vandana.
Hello, Otis.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Okay, tell us a little bit about this piece.
This piece is, I've just written it casually. I haven't thought about anything. Like it was just supposed to, it was just supposed to be just like a practice piece. But then I thought that I could go and submit it to you. So that is how it's all written.
That's great. I love it. That's fabulous. So this is, I mean, this is my theme of the day. So, you know, that we have these two types of writers. We have the writer that writes, and we have the writer that sort of evaluates and does this other work. So I am very much on the side of this writer who writes, you let them have free reign. Writing is easy. You just open a vein. We'll go back to that. We want this writer to be able to open that vein and they just type. And that is great. So that's the first thing that we do. Then we come back to the piece and we evaluate it. This is much different. And I will, there's, oh my God, there was a time in my life where all I did was write the beginnings of stories. I mean, I wrote the beginnings of stories for about 5 years because it was always easier to go to this person who just gets there and opens a vein, and then they would start writing a story until it got difficult, and then they would stop. And I never brought in this person who came in and revised those stories and brought them up to the next level. So I just kept accumulating more beginnings of stories without doing that evaluation. So writing that beginning can be easy, but we actually have to be both. We have to develop both of these skills and come back. Maybe you could read the read the first. So this is, I would call these stanzas. This, to me, the form here is kind of a prose poetry. I write in every form. So I write poetry, I write fiction, I write essays, I write in different lengths. So I write in every form. I think good writing is good writing if you understand the mechanics of good writing and understand our purposes in terms of being able to produce writing, being able to craft it so that we can reach an audience with it, that it applies to every single type of writing that we do. Unless you do the type of writing where you don't want people to read it, and that type of writing does exist. You know, where you write documentation. Abhinav and I were talking about this a little bit, probably, you know, you write documentation which you want to be obscure and you don't want anyone to read, right? Like Uber's description of their plan to raise the prices on people who had short battery life. Only for professionals. Okay, can you read the first 3 of these? I'm going to call them stanzas or paragraphs.
I never thought I could write poems.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised.
You want me to read the first line, first paragraph?
Yeah, if you could read the first 3, actually.
Okay. I'll start. I want to go with you, accompany you, feel the morning air on my skin, the fresh start of life, experience the many first with you. You have always been with me before, but I want to go with you today. You have always asked me to come, but I had refused. There were times when you had begged me to accompany you, but I had adamantly refused. Yet I want to experience the morning sun with you today. Come along, this can be done later. You had requested me, but I had refused. Even then, you would wait for me. There was seldom any day you would not ask me to come along. There were times you knew my answer, but even then you would ask me. You were sincere in your approach, but I always refused. Yet I want to experience the morning sun with you today. I want to come along with you always. I cherish the small moments we share. I know in this race of life, these are prized moments. Previously, I had always accompanied you. I always want to be with you whenever possible. There were times when I was at loss to spend time with you. I adore these small moments of togetherness. Even you are aware of the mutual feeling we share. Yet I want to experience the morning sun with you today.
Great.
You
Just there, yeah, that's great. So that gives us a sense of this form and this piece, it seems to me. So it took me a little while, but basically what poetry, I would say, I don't really have a great definition for it necessarily. I mean, poetry can be anything. Sometimes I say poetry is being able to write and not use punctuation marks, or poetry means you can, hit the return button whenever you feel like it. That might be true, but the way poetry ends up showing up on the page is that it has some kind of very, in a way, a stylized form that the writer is inventing. And so at a certain point, I noticed that this piece kind of has that. I want to go with you, accompany you. Come along, this can be done later. I want to come along with you always. I always accompany you. I want to mend the relationship. I felt that there was a kind of consistency in the way each of these paragraphs was beginning. And I noticed that there was a kind of consistency in the way they all ended too. The morning sun with you today. Yet I want to experience the morning sun with you today. Yet I want to experience the morning sun with you today. So we had that repetition. And I think that this follows a kind of poetic form. You're creating some kind of pattern, essentially, for us to experience. And a lot of the experience of a poem is the pattern that's created. Like a sonnet, Abhinav can remind me, is a iambic pentameter, Abhinav 4-4-4-2. I mean, it kind of depends on the sonnet. So what is that? 14 lines, I think. Someone will remember. But anyway, the sonnet has a particular form. The way poetry tends to work is that you establish a form, and then the form can be very rigid and strict, but then you deviate from the form for effect. So what we do in poetry usually is we create a pattern of some kind, we create this form, and then we deviate from it. So if you study sort of Shakespearean sonnets, for example, you'll see that it'll be iambic pentameter, all the way through, except for in line 12. At the end of line 12, suddenly it's not iambic pentameter. There's suddenly it's a reversal of it. And now we've come out of our anesthetized, dreamlike phase, and now we get confronted with the last two lines. So we've read 12 lines, we changed the form at the very end. It's not iambic pentameter. I forget what an iamb is and what the reversal is, a trochee maybe. So now we have a trochee at the end, and now we have these last two lines, and we're like, we get hit by a ball-peen hammer.
So I had to look this up, Otis. It says a sonnet is a 14-line poem in iambic pentameter with a volta or a thematic
Drop the mic.
turn.
Yeah, so there you go. I don't want to be. Drop the mic. Yes, so so we create form and we deviate from the form. So in this piece, Vandana, I feel the beginning of the form, but I think that you have this writer who's coming in and you're just actually, you're writing from your heart, you're just typing it out the way it feels right to you. So now you can come in with this other person and you can decide what it is that you want to do. You have something that has started out kind of seeming poetic. And so do you want to enhance and make it go in that direction? Or do you want to make it go in a different direction? And whatever direction you choose is also going to describe your audience. There is an audience for poetry. It's generally pretty small, right? Which is fine. There's an audience for nonfiction, like Madhavi's piece that we just read. But that audience, because it's specific, people who are interested in that topic, that is also smaller, but it's probably greater than poetry. And then there's an audience for stories, right, which are universal, which means whoever you reach with that story, they're going to read it. And that audience is potentially the largest of all. So you decide, how do I want to spend my time? I've spent my time very happily working on poetry that's been read by, 5 people. and published it. And even though it's published, it's still only read by 5 people. That's kind of a joke. Anyway, it's published poetry, but it's not read by a lot of people. I've written essays that have been read by a few more people, and I've read stories that have been read by more people still. Always my mom. My mom has read everything. So does this make a little, Vandana, does it make a little bit of sense about what I'm saying to maybe formalize the structure more so to make it more poetic? So what that would mean might be that this line, the ones that I'm marking in orange, might be exactly the same. Or as you have it here, you have, I want to go with you. And then you have, the next one is come along, this can be done later. Then this one might be, I want to come along with you. And this one might be, again, come along, this can be done later. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now we know that it isn't just an accident that this is developing a poetic form. We know it's being done on purpose. And you can see how it already has an effect, because we are basically pattern makers. Human beings are pattern makers. You in poetry are inventing the pattern. So when the first sonnet was written, someone invented that pattern. They invented the sonnet. There's a lot of other poetic forms that people have invented and then have become sort of standardized, like the sonnet, the villanelle, et cetera, et cetera. They've standardized these forms, but someone invented it to start with because it worked. You are here inventing a kind of form where it begins, that first line begins the same. The second stanza has a different line. Then you return to the same line. That begins to develop a form. We develop a form, I'll repeat, in order to deviate from it for effect. So that is the purpose of the form, to basically get the reader involved in this repetitive form, and then we change it in order to do something more with it. The other thing I notice about this piece is that I want to go with you today. So this you here in this piece, I'm never given anything except for this pronoun. And I'm not positive that it's a person, or if it's a spirit, or a deity, or an act of nature. I don't know what it is. I understand right now that it's purposely vague. It isn't, I want to go along with you today, Josh. That's a joke again. I want to go along with you, Josh. So it isn't that, it's not specific, it's clearly purposefully, because again, in the poetic, and maybe it's not, when you're writing it, you don't think about it necessarily 100% like purposefully, but the outcome is that purposely, the person that the narrator wants to go along with is vague. I appreciated that, but also I had trouble connecting with it because it was too vague for me. I wasn't able to finally formulate something in my mind to understand what this, this kind of paramour was. And I do want to know that because I want to understand what's going on in the poem. So the you, as it's written now, is so vague that I never attribute anything to it. I don't think it's necessarily a person, but maybe it is. I don't think necessarily it's like the spirit of the time, but maybe it is. I'm not able to get enough so that the metaphoric quality of this experience can have an effect on me. And so what I would suggest is, in this piece, if you want to pursue it, is that you more formalize these beginnings and endings so that they create a pattern. That you think of these things as stanzas that might have very similar lengths. We'll notice if we look further, so like this one does not have, this one, the length is almost twice as long. So I would try and think about having them have more similar lengths. And so the beginning and ending, you would make a pattern with that. You would have them be of similar length unless you were deviating for a specific purpose. And I do suggest that. And then I would try to somehow give us a little bit more in the middle of these stanzas between the opening and closing of each of them, so that we can understand what it is we're talking about a little bit more specifically. And we do want it to be more than Josh, right? We don't want it to be as specific as that, although it could be, but also we want to have some kind of metaphoric quality to it, because the reader is not concerned about the relationship of this narrator and any specific person. The reader is concerned with what this means and what they can take from it for their own lives. So that's a lot of discussion for this piece. Madonna, what do you think?
I'm exactly. I wanted to continue. I have written this, and then I wanted to continue more about it. Just because I had some word limit, I could not. I could not write it down.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
So if you say I will continue it, I do want to continue it. So I can write. I can be more specific in the next part, because I
Yeah,
never
try
thought
and
this would be a.
I think, you know, when this person, right, does their first writing, we just consider it a happy accident. You know, there was a writer, I think it's Flannery O'Connor, but I'm not positive. But one writer said, every morning I sit at my typewriter because if something happens, I want to be there to see it. And I love that expression. And that's how I feel, because I sit down at a typewriter, there's nothing going on in my brain whatsoever usually. And then suddenly words start to appear on the screen. So this is certainly a happy accident. And then it's up to you, whether it's a project that you want to then work with, this other person comes in and really starts to work with it. And there is a certain point where the person who does the work on this fresh writing, these two can merge a little bit, but you want to be careful about that, you know, where you start to direct yourself in terms of what you're writing. Like you're saying, come back to it, write with a little bit more specificity, write with a little more intention, maybe. I definitely write with intention. So it's not completely, original invention for me anymore. But yeah, I like that idea. I would like to see what this looks like with more design and more specificity, those two things. The design is repetitious and it really isn't very specific, but it's forming the design element. And then the specificity between those two design elements, basically like a sandwich, right? That's going to be interesting to me. Thank you for this work.
Thank you. So you want me to continue again with this piece?
Madonna, I want you to do what you want to do.
I want to continue with it.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Rohini is here?
Yeah.
Rohini, what is, yeah.
I think she's
Yeah.
facing some internet connectivity issues. So
I have a very bad connection. So could you take up mine next time? I keep losing the connection.
Oh, okay. So take it up next time, next week?
Yeah, please. Because I lose something in the middle. I don't want to lose it.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll do it next week. Then we're going to do Ashvani. Where it's, I don't see. Oh, there he is. Okay. Thank you, Rohini. Ashvani, how are you? Yeah.
I'm great. How are you, Otis?
I'm doing great. I'm always happier when I see a piece by you on my docket because I enjoy them so much. You have a style, Ashvani. You have a style. Tell us a little. What you've done a lot of reading, I think.
That's one way of putting it. I mean, yes. And my reading habits are rather wayward. I mean, in the sense that I would pick up anything and start reading it, but the thing which holds my attention the maximum is something with a plot in it. Just
Yeah.
non-fiction and all, I find it a little difficult to sort of stick to. But I do end up reading that as well. So it's okay.
Well, that's interesting. So you like those, I mean, as I put nonfiction is sort of like an interest category sort of thing. Like, are you interested in reading about this or this or this? And it makes a thesis, you know, and it has an argument of some kind. And you just like these larger, more universal stories. I like what you say about, I'm going to say this to everyone. I'm sure it's clear, but if you want to be a writer, you want to also be a reader. And hopefully you already have that demon, the demon in you that just, I mean, I will read the carton of milk. I can't not read things. You know, I will, if I have nothing to read, I prefer watching movies, even in English with subtitles, and then I read the subtitles. Yeah, and I like the way you say my reading is wayward. My reading is also wayward. I do this funny. I got this book about Babylon, and I spent most of my time actually looking up the source notes for it and reading those things. I would read something, I'd be like, that's interesting. I wonder what they say there, because it's more specific. It gets down even more nitty gritty than this sort of overview. And I'm like, okay, I want to read that. And boy, do you get some good stories there. Okay, let's, I think that we may have seen this piece a little bit before. I feel like this is a theme that we've seen from you before, Ashwani, but maybe it's all original.
No, this is the first time I've.
Yeah. Well, we as writers, we also develop sort of thematic issues, of course. You know, there are things that we like to come back to again and again. There are some. Where the heck is this paragraph start? Okay, let's have you read this first paragraph. This paragraph that I'm outlining in yellow. Sorry, it's not the first one.
On Friday morning, the pattern was broken by a loud and long-drawn wail, calling upon the denizens of the street in the name of Allah to find generosity in their hearts and donate to the poor, namely the source of that mournful mourning, a woman clad in a black burqa who carried a large black piece of cloth stretched out in her arms, suggesting where the donations ought to end up. A few currency notes of high denomination, rupees 500, rupees 200, and rupees 100, carelessly scattered over the black cloth. Vandana, can you please mute yourself? A few currency notes of high denomination, rupees 500, rupees 200, and rupees 100, carelessly scattered over the black cloth, and the absence of any coins on it persuasively suggested the lower cutoff mark for individual donations. Alka watched with interest the leisurely advance along the street of the burqa and the black cloth, the currency notes in the latter gathering new comrades along the street. If any rupees 50, rupees 20, or rupees 100, rupees 10 notes arrived at the black cloth, they were deftly removed and stashed away in a side pocket of the voluminous burqa, while coins were unceremoniously stowed away into another. Something in the plaintive cries of the woman struck a chord in Alka. They reminded her of Amina, the destitute in their village, who had lived alone in her decrepit thatch hut after her husband had passed away and her son had abandoned her. It was a village with Hindus and Muslims, and their combined charity had sustained the hapless widow till age ravaged her too. On an impulse, she decided to heed her entreaty for a donation. Neil was ready, well, almost, for work, and she surprised him by planting a quick peck on his cheek and darting off to catch the burqa-clad woman before she reached the end of the street. When she returned after depositing a rupees 200 note on the welcoming fabric, Neil was gone.
There's a, Ashwani, I really just so enjoy, you create this world with your language, basically, you know, which is coming out of all the reading that you've done. You have this rhythm, you have this drive towards writing detail. You're not afraid of words, you know, you're not afraid to write them. A lot of writers, when they start off, they find writing to be so arduous and so difficult, they can't get into that zone where they can go ahead and type and sort of express this consciousness, which we express with language. And you express an entire consciousness with this language and you direct it. It's like reading a lucid dream, right? It's just really so enjoyable. I love the details. There are times when I would like, you know, so this writer here that can write these prose, I'd like this writer, the reviser, to come in and maybe take it back a little bit sometimes, to choose when the language kind of blows up and when it doesn't, you know, to have both effects. But it's just, I mean, this is a wonderful lucid dream. I'm seeing this woman. I'm not 100% understanding how I'm seeing her from perspective, out the window, I think, maybe. Alka's maybe looking down on her.
Yes.
The I want to say deduction, but it's like it's not really deduction. Your ability to perceive the details and their meanings in life, I think, are very well done. It's not exactly, you know, genius, but, you know, that there's a couple notes out on the, you know, on the cloth that suggest what you should throw. And that's a nice detail, that when other things are thrown there, then those are taken away. So it's always this sort of, you know, a bit of a pitch. That's really nice. And then the other thing that you do so nicely here is also psychologically intuitive. And that's something for all of us as writers to, I think, really develop. We're students of character, right? We're students of human beings. We want to write about human beings. We want to understand human beings, and we're writing about human beings for other human beings. So understanding the sort of psychology, the emotional psychology of human beings is very important to us. And you have this great moment where this woman walks by and you say, something in the plaintive cries of the woman struck a chord in Alka. And then they reminded her of Amina, the destitute in their village. And you give us a whole section on that. So you basically juxtapose this woman walking down the street, whoever or whatever she is, we don't know, and we'll learn more later, right? And you write that this chord is struck. It is a narrative sequence. This is a narrative sequence, right? This happens, then the chord is struck, and then she goes out to give the money. That is a narrative sequence that makes sense. And it's wonderful that you cover it, and that you cover it with such, you know, incredible detail.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you.
Okay, that was the sugar. Now for the spice. That was the sweet. Now for the sour. I would like to see this story get started a little bit earlier. You know, so this story is complete. There's two things this story is complete. That's great. It's a 5-page story. So I think you should work on it, Now you got to bring this person. I see, Ashwani, that this person who loves to write this language, you have this person. I want to see if this person can come in and do the hard work. You know, what happens is, I think this is always the case. We write a draft like this. It's fresh. It's great. We write it, maybe, 4 hours, 6 hours. I've, written stories in a day. I mean, I'm a practice writer. So we write this quickly. Then we bring this person in. And what they do is they come in and they destroy all that is good and sacred about this story. They destroy it. And then they have to come back again and they continue to destroy it. And then they come in, they destroy it again. And then they basically end up rebuilding it, ideally into something that feels as if it was written fresh the first time. But that is a lot of work. This first draft, this is all joy for most of us, who really are practiced in writing. It's just joy and expression and imagination. Then we have this destructive force that comes in and tries to do work with it, and not so good. And particularly hard to bring it all the way to the point where, yes, they destroy it, they make it worse. They make it worse. You end up going crazy. You have doubts. You think it will never be fixed again. You want to throw it away. And then slowly this person has to be good enough so that they can make it, give a little bit more form to it. So, but control their language to the point where it still feels as fresh as that first time. It's not easy, but this is a short enough piece that I think it's a really good test piece for you to do that.
Very good.
And so what I would suggest in a very short piece, we don't have any time to spare. In the old style, for readers like us, we might start reading Charles Dickens and we don't care if it takes us 50 pages of reading about Bleak House before we get to what the story is. I actually don't like Charles Dickens. So that's not been for me. I think in a modern short story, we really have to grab the attention of the reader right away. We want to try and put the conflict onto the page as quickly as possible, basically the beginning. And in a short piece like this, it would be just the first paragraph. And sometimes you do it in the first and second sentences. I've seen exquisite examples of that. The conflict, and then why we care. So what that is the external struggle and the internal struggle. Because the external struggle is the thing that makes us wonder what's going to happen and turn the page, read through the sentences. That's number one. Or you can reverse these two. So it doesn't matter which you have, but it has to be 1 and 2, basically. So the conflict is an external conflict, maybe between this wife and the husband. So that's there in this story already. And the question is, what's going to happen? And then the internal conflict is, why does it matter? What's at stake for the character who is our point of view character? And the internal conflict is the thing that the reader identifies with. So very specifically, the external conflict is specific, right? That is Alka and her husband. So Alka and her husband is not me. I don't have that conflict. That's a specific conflict to them. But the internal conflict is universal. That is the conflict that I identify with Alka. And that is the way that I tether onto her and participate in the story and wonder about the outcome. I have a stake in the story. If they were two sport teams, I would be her fan, not the fan of the opponent, right? So my destiny is tied to her destiny. And I would like to see you be able to bring that into the beginning of this piece. Right now, she woke, right? So she woke up, and then nothing else actually is happening. She's always maybe she's opening her eyes and she's looking at the fan above. The noise which had woken her, now we're covering the noises from before she even woke up. So we're not moving forward, Ashwani. We have her waking up. That's not a lot of action. And then we have the next paragraph, which actually takes place here. So we're going backwards. So not only are we not going forward, Ashwani, I told you it was going to be sour. Not only are we not going forward, we're going backward. So I will say, please go forward. Set up the conflict, external conflict, internal conflict. You have to figure out a way to do it. Maybe it doesn't start here with her waking up. I joke with my partner. She is also a writer, and I joke that she could write a memoir, starts in bed. Like it seems like all her stories start in bed. It's like, get out of bed, okay? Get out of bed first and start the story. You know, eat an egg or something. So I'm going to suggest that you set it up and get the story moving forward really more quickly. That does not mean that you might have your issue might be a little bit this, because you blow up these moments, right, with these details that are so wonderfully written. And you might feel like you can't do that when you have the march of time, right? So maybe your task is to get used to understanding that you can go quickly, create momentum, and then you can slow the pace for those paragraphs. And transitioning between the two, maybe that's a little bit more difficult for you and something to work on. I'll also point out, to go back to the sugar instead of the sour. I love that so right here, you go, we read this, when she returned after depositing the 200 rupee note on the welcoming fabric, Neil was gone. I'd like you to have a separation there in terms of space. When he came back from work in the evening, that's tremendous economy. That's a very good thing in a short story. You don't bother with the rest of the day. You just get back to the story. His first question was, you gave some money to that Muslim woman. And that's really, now we understand what the conflict is. I would be sorry to lose, I would be sorry to lose all that description. So I don't know what you're going to do to fix that so that we can have the conflict both start early on, but the conflict doesn't have to be as specific as giving money to the Muslim woman or a Hindu woman, right? It doesn't have to be that specific here. It's really a conflict of point of view between the wife and the husband, right? It's a conflict in worldview, in a sense, between the two of them. So you can get that on the page probably earlier on. But I think that's wonderful. And then I think we've already discussed, Ashwani, that you have a love of the O. Henry ending. Have we?
Yes. That's because he's my favorite author.
Well, I don't. Okay, but to each their own, you decide. You decide. I would like to bring you over to the dark side where we do not have easily shut doors and neat little boxes to wrap everything in and then put them on the shelf. I would love to bring you over to that side, but we are who we are. So I must allow it, I guess. But wonderful story, Ashwani. I would love to see this finished and sent out somewhere. And it does remind me that I think we have on our docket somewhere to develop some venues for publishing these stories. So I would like to see that happen too. But this is, if you can sustain bringing this reviser into this story, if you can sustain the doubts, it's really the doubts that kill us. If you can sustain the doubts after they destroy this story and suck all the life out of it through revision, that you can still resuscitate it into something that's fresh and alive, then I think this is going to be a really a winning story. Particularly if you cut the O. Henry ending. Sorry, I couldn't, had to fix that in. Thank you for this work.
Thank you, Otis.
And Abhinav, that's us. That's stop the share.
Okay, excellent. I think this was good. We covered 3 pieces, and Rohini's piece can be covered next week when hopefully she has a better internet connection. We had a few new people join, so hopefully, we'll get to see more pieces from them. Vandana shared one today, and there were a couple of other people also that I'm hoping will send pieces. So we should, this is good. I think after a little bit of a period towards in the beginning of the year when people were still trying to figure out their cadence of writing and all, and we didn't get some pieces, I think we have now started, people have got into a groove, hopefully, of writing. So we should see more pieces in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and I know it can be daunting, but I love looking at fresh work. That first draft work is great. That's words on the page. It is incredibly valuable, and it's hard won. So don't feel shy about bringing that work if it helps you. And then I don't mind looking at work that's, that you're working on. Sometimes our investment in work that we've worked on a lot, then it can make the criticism harder. So that fresh work is great to see. It's like, okay, you just wrote it. It didn't take that long. This work that you're like, I'm bringing my tome. I've worked on it for 15 years. It's like, it's hard to work on. It gets a little bit calcified.
Yes, absolutely. So folks, please send in your writing pieces. Keep them coming in. And we will see you again next Sunday. Sorry, what am I saying?
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you, Anubhav.